You've heard of Persia, right? The ancient empire, Cyrus the Great, all that history. And you've definitely heard of Iran, a huge player on the world stage today. But what's the real story of how one became the other? Let's get into it. So let's just tackle the big question head on. Persia or Iran? Are they the same place? Seems like a simple yes or no, but the answer is way more interesting than you'd think. It's a story about identity that goes back thousands of years.
I mean, think about it. When you hear Persia, you probably think of ancient history, beautiful art, epic poetry. But when you hear Iran, it's more about the modern country, geopolitics, stuff you see in the news. They feel like two completely different worlds. So how do we connect the dots?
Okay, the short answer is yes, they are the same place. But hang on, because the full story is where it gets really good. We're talking about a 2,500-year-old identity crisis, a king's massive plan to rebrand his entire nation, and, believe it or not, a very strange connection to the Nazis. To really understand how this all went down, we have to go way, way back. Because this whole double identity thing isn't a modern invention. It was basically an open secret for millennia. One name used by everybody on the outside, and another used by the people who actually lived there. The first key term you gotta know is exonym. It's just a fancy word for a name used by outsiders. Persia was never what the people living there called their whole country. It was the ancient Greeks who named the entire empire after just one single region, Parsa, which was the homeland of Cyrus the Great's tribe. To put it another way, just imagine if some visitors landed in London and then decided to call all of Great Britain Londonia. That's pretty much what happened here. It was an outsider's label based on one small part, and somehow that's what stuck around the world for centuries. So on the flip side, you have the endonym, the insider's name, and for thousands of years that name has been Iran. It comes from an ancient phrase meaning land of the Aryans. And yes, we are definitely going to circle back to that word later. And this name was incredibly tough. I mean, look at this timeline. From Cyrus through Alexander the Great's invasion, different empires, conquests, and dynasties, one thing stayed the same. Through all that upheaval, for the people who lived there, their home was always Iran.
So if they always called it Iran, what happened? Well, this brings us into the 20th century and to the one man who decided it was time to set the record straight for the rest of the world, Reza Shah.
By the 1920s, Reza Shah had a serious branding problem on his hands. For decades, weak rulers had let Britain and Russia push the country around. So the name Persia started to be associated with weakness and foreign meddling. To him, it was colonial baggage. His entire project was driven by this powerful idea of national pride, summed up perfectly right here. We will be called what we call ourselves. This was all about reclaiming their identity on the world stage. Now, the name change wasn't just some random idea. It was actually the final piece of a huge modernization plan. He was building railways, overhauling the legal system, rebuilding the army from the ground up. Reclaiming the true name, Iran, was the symbolic capstone to this whole grand project. And the big moment came in 1935. The date was chosen very carefully. March 21st, Nowruz, the Persian New Year. At an international gathering, Reza Shah made it official. He asked every country to please stop using Persia and start using the correct name, Iran. But this is where the story takes a very sharp and pretty controversial turn. The timing of this name change involved a really high-stakes geopolitical gamble. Which brings us to a question that historians have debated ever since. Was there a Nazi connection to this whole decision? Well, the facts are pretty stark. By 1940, Nazi Germany was, by far, Iran's biggest trade partner. We're talking almost half of all its imports. Reza Shah really admired Germany's industrial power and saw them as a strong, modernizing partner. Okay, now we have to be extremely clear about that word Aryan. The Nazi ideology twisted it into a fake, pseudo-scientific term for a master race. Its true meaning in the Iranian context has absolutely nothing to do with that. It's an ancient word referring to the linguistic and cultural heritage of the people from that land. Totally different things. So while the timing was awkward, to say the least, historians generally agree that Reza Shah's main motive was geopolitical. He wasn't endorsing Nazi ideology, he was strategically using a powerful Germany to push back against decades of British and Soviet meddling in his country. This gamble would end up costing him his throne, and the story of the name was actually far from over.
What happened next was a fascinating series of reversals that led to the compromise we have today.
So in 1941, Britain and the Soviet Union invaded neutral Iran to secure a supply line. Reza Shah was forced out. Then, in a truly bizarre little historical footnote, Winston Churchill asked the new Shah to temporarily change the name back to Persia because he was worried his military planners would get Iran and the Rock confused. You can't make this stuff up.
After the war, the name went back to Iran. But by 1959, officials started to worry that by dropping Persia completely, they were losing centuries of cultural brand recognition. So a committee decided, you know what? Both names can be used. And that created the dual system we have now.
So here's the easy guide. You use Iran when you're talking about the modern country, politics, or what you see in the news. You use Persia or Persian when you're talking about historical and cultural stuff like Persian rugs, Persian poetry, and Persian cuisine.
So to sum it all up, Persia was the name outsiders used. Iran was always the name the insiders used. The 1935 change was a powerful move by a nation to take control of its own story. And today, both names are totally correct. It all just depends on the context. And that leaves us with a final question to think about. Does a name define a nation, or is it the nation, with all of its history, its culture, and its people, that ultimately defines its own name?